Isabel, and today I want to talk about my reading tastes a little bit more. I wanted to do this video because I thought it would be a good chance for you to get to know me a bit better, and also for me to show you some of the books that I have read and enjoyed before, but that I might not otherwise have an opportunity to talk about. So what I thought I would do is talk about 5 things that I enjoy reading about, and also give you 3 examples for each of these of books that I have read and love that have that thing in it. Now I have quite a stack of books to talk about, so you might want to get comfy, maybe get yourself some tea, and let's get started. I will start with the category of books that people who know my tastes a little bit will probably already expect, and that is books set in the wilderness. There's just something about characters having to survive on their own in the wilderness that I just really enjoy reading about. And there are many different kinds of books that have that as a feature. So the first one I want to talk about is the first book in, I would say, my favourite series probably, and that is Annihilation by VanderMeer. This is the first book in the Southern Reach trilogy. It is about a team of female, mostly scientists, who are sent into this Area X, as it is called, to try and find out what is wrong with it. At some point it has just started existing and it has an invisible border, this Area X, that people who go into don't often leave, and those who do come back changed in strange ways. So inside Area X, what has happened is that nature has basically taken back over. Nobody who had lived in that area before is there anymore, possibly. And there's just a lot of themes of nature taking back space and also becoming very dangerous again. And I really enjoyed how this team of women tries to navigate this space and survive in this very strange wilderness. The next book I want to talk about is actually non-fiction. There are many non-fiction books that fall into this category, and it's books that follow explorations. And in this case, it's The Lost City of Sed and Colonel Fawcett's quest to find it. So the Lost City of Sed is a city that was rumoured to exist in the Amazon, and during the 19th and early 20th century many explorers went into the Amazon looking for it, and in the case of Fawcett got lost themselves doing so. After he got lost, many more people went and tried to find him, and in this book Grann also follows this story and tries to figure out what happened, but he also talks about how people were trying to map and explore the Amazon, which at that point was a region that wasn't really well known yet and was just complete wilderness. And I'm really fascinated by that, that only 100 years past people could go to places that weren't mapped yet and that nobody really knew what existed there. And yeah, that's really fascinating to me. Next up in this category is The Revenant. Now, The Revenant is set in, let me check, 1823. And in 1823 there were trappers in the North American region, and one of those trappers, Glass, was attacked by a grizzly bear and then left behind by his colleagues to die, which he didn't. And this is actually based on a true story. Glass didn't die because of the grizzly bear attack. He actually survived and made a whole trip alone without his hunting gear or anything, just to get revenge on the people who unjustly left him behind to die. And while we're on the topic of The Revenant, a little bonus fact about my reading is I really enjoy reading stories set in the Wild West. So I will just give you another example of that, and that is West by Carys Davies. Now, this isn't necessarily set in the wilderness, but it is set during the time when the west of North America wasn't really known to Europeans yet. And this book specifically is about a man who goes off on a quest to find dinosaurs because they believed that dinosaurs might still be alive in the West. And it's also about his daughter, whom he leaves behind, and the dangers that lurk much closer to home. And this is a very great short novel that kind of takes the genre of the Western and makes it fresh and different. Moving on to the next thing, another thing that I really enjoy in books is strong female characters. Now, I feel a bit like Maeve from Sex Education saying that, but it is true. And the books that I have chosen to show you for this category have strong female characters in a sense that I feel like they are just very well written and have a lot of depth to them, and also are very strong-willed. So the first book for this category that I have is My Sister the Serial Killer. As you can probably guess from the title, it has a woman who is a serial killer. And the main character of this book is actually the sister of the serial killer, and her sister always calls her in whenever she has accidentally killed one of her boyfriends to clean up after her. And this book very much explores the relationship and dynamic between the two sisters. It also explores the views towards women in Nigerian society and the expectations that are put on them. And it is a very fascinating read and also darkly funny. And both of the sisters, I feel, are very interesting characters to read about. Now, I couldn't make a video talking about strong female characters without mentioning We Have Always Lived in a Castle. This is also about two sisters, and these sisters live alone in this big mansion at the edge of a town, and they live there alone because a few years past, the whole family has been killed. The townspeople believe that it was the older sister, Constance, who did it, and that's why they shun both of the sisters. The book mainly focuses on the younger sister, Mary-Cat, as she calls herself, and Mary-Cat very much enjoys living alone in this house with her sister, but someday a man turns up who tells them that he is their cousin and very much tries to change their lives, which Mary-Cat tries to avoid. This book also goes to some dark places and explores what sisters are willing to do for each other. Last book for the strong female characters is Convenience Store Woman. Now, in Convenience Store Woman, we follow a woman living in Japan who is, I believe, in her mid-30s and has always worked in a convenience store, and she is very happy doing that. But the people around her think that it is a bit strange. They expect her to move on, get a husband, have kids, or at least get what they would think of as a real job. And the way the main character in this reacts to these expectations from friends and family and society in general is very different and very interesting. And it is a character that has stuck with me ever since I read it. Next up, we have the third thing that I like in books, and that is interlinking storylines. And the first book that comes to mind when I think about interlinking storylines is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. Some of you have probably seen the movie or actually read the book. For those of you who don't know, Cloud Atlas is a very big story following multiple characters in different timelines. So we have timelines from Pacific Voyages to the 60s, all the way into futuristic timelines, and then even post-apocalyptic ones. And in each of these timelines we follow a different protagonist, but it turns out that all of these are somehow linked, and of course also the events of each timeline have an influence on the following timelines. And I really enjoy it when an author can pull off having that many characters and that many timelines and still make them all relevant and interesting to read and also tie in together. And this might be even more so with the movie than the book, but it's also definitely there in the book. On the opposite side of thickness of book, we have The Archive of Alternate Endings by Lindsey. This is a very short novella written in vignettes, but it also has many different timelines and many different characters, and it switches between those. And again, the characters are linked, and in this they are mostly linked through the story of Hansel and Gretel. Somehow in each timeline this fairy tale has an influence. So, for example, one timeline is the Brothers Grimm actually writing down that fairy tale. One timeline has a sister using the fairy tale to tell her brother about some very dark secrets hidden in the family. And in one timeline that I found particularly endearing, we have two satellites sending bits of the story back and forth between each other. Another thing that binds all of these timelines together is the appearance of Halley's Comet. And Halley's Comet is a comet that appears in regular intervals. I have forgotten how many years, but all of the timelines are separated by that. So you have a timeline kind of every time Halley's Comet appears. And I think this is a very clever way of telling stories spanning a very wide variety of times, but also being connected. Lastly, for the stories with interlinking storylines is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Station 11 is a post-apocalyptic novel. It might not be the best one to read right now, though in a way it might be the best one to read right now, because it follows the events both shortly before and then a few years after a pandemic wipes out most of humanity. Again, we follow a few different characters, and all of them are, of course, strongly influenced by this pandemic, and some of them make it through. And in this post-apocalyptic setting, we follow a traveling theatre group who perform Shakespeare plays. And this theme of Shakespeare and literature and art, binding people together and surviving, is very strong in this book, because it also opens with a performance of a Shakespeare play before the pandemic hits. But the characters are also connected in different ways, sometimes very loosely, sometimes more strongly, and again, it's a lot of fun to figure out who is who and how they are connected to the other characters in the bigger picture. The fourth category of books that I really like is books based on mythology or folklore or fairy tales, something like that. And the first one I have to show you is actually inspired by African folklore and mythology, and it is Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. Now, this is the first book in a fantasy trilogy, as I said, based on African mythology. And that's what I really loved about this, because I have read many books based on Greek mythology, so it felt very fresh and new to read something based on a different mythology. And the way James incorporated mythical creatures into this big adventure plot is brilliant. So this book features witches, shapeshifters, I think also some god-type creatures, demons, just everything you would want from a very folklore-y story. Next, I have a book that is more well-known, I feel like. If you are interested in fairy tale retellings, you will probably know about The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This is a collection of short stories, and it features many of Carter's retellings of fairy tales, and most of them are rather twisted, also very feminist, and very unexpected. And I love how Carter took something we knew or think we know and made it very different, and also gave it a very modern twist. Lastly, for the mythology-inspired books, I have The World's Wife by Carol Ann Duffy. The World's Wife is a poetry collection, and these poems are all based on mythological or historical women. Many of them women of well-known characters or people like Freud's wife, or Penelope, who is the wife of Odysseus, and she takes those often silent and forgotten women and gives them a voice in this collection. And many of the poems are very tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic, but they're also very approachable and easy, I would say, to understand, which is not to say that they aren't well written, but I feel like if you aren't really into poetry yet, this would be a good collection to start with, also because it features a lot of characters that you might already know from history and mythology, and it is really fun to see them in a different context and also hear their voice in a sense for once. Lastly, I have what is probably my favourite category, and that I just termed weird things. And what I mean by that is stories that are very much rooted in reality, but that feature some kind of speculative, supernatural element. And the first one of those is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This one follows a trio of girls who are in this school or on an island when something that they call the tox breaks out. And the tox is a sickness that alters the girls' bodies. So some of them grow scales, some of them get second spines, and so even though some of the themes like coming of age and coming to terms with your sexuality and this boarding school setting feel very real, you have this element that is very strange and different and is what made this book appeal to me very much. The next one that I chose as an example for this category is Cold Skin. And in Cold Skin we follow a protagonist who is fed up with, I think it is World War I, and decides to leave society and takes on the job of weather observer on an Antarctic island. And he believes that the only people around on this island are him and the lighthouse keeper, but then the first night he's there, he finds out that there are actually creatures coming from the sea trying to kill him. And so this book very much explores themes of isolation and loneliness, but it also has this horror element of the creatures. And I don't want to spoil anything, but in the end you will question who is the actual monster. And it does that through the use of these creatures, but the messages in it still very much apply to reality. Lastly, I couldn't make a video about things I like in books without mentioning my absolute favourite book of all times, and it is The Blue Fox by Sjón. The Blue Fox is set in Iceland in the 1800s, and it is a very short novella written in parts in vignettes. And I actually don't want to say too much about it, but why I have put it in this category of weird things is that it features a man turning into a fox. I feel like I haven't explained some of these books very well, but I try to keep it short-ish. I feel like this is going to be a very long video anyway. But if any of those sounded interesting to you, I do encourage you to check them out. They are all books that I really enjoy and highly recommend. I hope this video was interesting to you, and I'll hopefully see you in my next one. Bye!